Hello, and everyone, and welcome to Startup Shop Talk. Today, we are talking about the business model canvas, more specifically, a complete guide to the business model canvas. So let's do this. Dan, good morning. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you doing, Josh?
I am exceedingly well, thank you. It's Friday. I'm pumped. We're here. We're gonna do this. It's gonna be great. So
We're going to do it live.
we're gonna do it live. We're gonna make shit up and hope that it's gold. Like that's our goal here today. So actually, before we really dive into everything, right? We're here to talk about the business model canvas, and I know that this is something, Dan, that you actually spend quite a bit of time talking about. You talk about it on your own. You talk about it when you do one-on-one coaching. You talk about it when you mentor with the SBDC. You have a Udemy class on it. Like, okay, why, Dan, do you like the business model canvas so much? I just want to start there.
Okay. It's a great tool, and let's think about this for a second. Like, a tool is there to help us, to enable us, to empower us to think about other things, right? So in the very beginning, when I saw the business model canvas, I was like, oh, you know what this does is it really distills down what a business plan is, and it takes a lot of that mystery out of it. There's a couple of things about business plans that really just jiggle my brain around a little bit, and what those are is different thought processes, right? So customer stuff, and then the production stuff, and then all the finances. Those are three distinct areas that really, when I try to get them all in my head at the same time, it hurts really bad. Because here's why. It's because
No, I get it.
Right, dude?
It's a lot.
What?
It's a lot.
It is a lot. And here's why I think, we talk about metacognition on the live stream, right? So let's think about thinking for a second.
All right.
The right-hand side of the canvas is all about customer stuff, right? So the business plan talks about what it is that you're doing, the customer stuff, and marketing plan, and all the things, right, that go along with that. Well, what that does is that exercises sort of the inductive problem-solving processes that are inherent to human nature, right? So we're looking at a bunch of things, and we're drawing conclusions from all that data, right? Okay, now flip that around, literally on its head, and we have all the problem-solving stuff, which is like, oh, how are we actually going to get this to market? How are we going to make it? How are we going to do it, et cetera, et cetera? And that's all some Sherlock Holmes shit right there, right? That's like deductive thinking, right?
Right.
And those two things, those two problem-solving processes are, and for me, they're simultaneously incompatible. In and of themselves, I can still think about them, right? And oh, by the way, here's the other thing. I have costs and I have revenue. So I'm talking about the viability of the actual of the business model. And it's almost like I'm getting apples and I'm getting oranges, and I'm trying to compare both of them, like with cost structure and
Right.
and revenue structures, right? But here's the trick: is they're both fruit. Using the common language of numbers, I can actually start comparing these things by looking at other properties. And so why do I like the canvas? Why do I talk about the canvas so much? It's because it is a great tool for me to be able to hold all of those things on one piece of paper. And so I can think about them either individually or systematically or in chunks. And so that way I'm not simultaneously trying to fit all this in my head. I'm letting the paper do that, right? Or the diagram or whatever. So that's why I like it.
There's so much to unpack here. So I want to set them as a frame, and then I want to dive in. Like we got 9 boxes to get through. We got process to get through. Like we got a jam-packed hour here. But I want to unpack what you just said a little bit. So if I heard it, you basically described the words that I'm hearing here: business model canvas, right? Starting in reverse order, canvas, this idea of it's a visual tool. And a lot of people don't think about it that way, but it's a visual tool. You were talking about the right side of the canvas, and the right side having all this external stuff to the organization, this value prop, the value creation stuff, all the outside the organization stuff. And then you have the left side of the canvas, and the left side is all this internal stuff, you call it the Sherlock Holmes shit, right? It's all the stuff that's happening behind the curtain. Right. And then it's glued together in a very real and concrete way by this idea of value propositions. So it's literally a visual layout of everything. It's this canvas, but it's a canvas that's describing a business model, and a business model is like any other model, a kind of model, right? And a model is like a shared language that we use to talk about something, right? That we can use to describe it, so we can manipulate and surface assumptions and kind of play with it together in a way that makes sense. And it's our business model, which is composed of those, like core pieces that we talked about. So let's break it down. Let's go.
Well, wait a minute. Before we break it down, can I get your take on it?
Yeah.
Okay. So in our conversations before, you've like, okay, so the tendency of the way that most people present the canvas is it's like a checklist. And you're like,
right.
Hell no, it's not a checklist.
True story. So it's okay. It's a pet peeve of mine. And I'll come back to this, I think, at the end of the show, where it'll make a little bit more sense. But I appreciate you teeing it up. Let's tee it up. All right. So the idea is, yes, a lot of people will say, okay, right, we've filled it out. We got all 9 boxes. They're full of sticky notes. It's amazing. And then they'll go, we're done. Check. Right. And they'll be like, that's kind of the end of the story. And it's like, okay, we have a plan. And now all we got to do is go show this to an investor and the riches come pouring in. And of course, that's bullshit, right? Like, that's not how this works, right? It's not this idea of like, oh, I did a business model canvas, done. No, man, that's not what it is. It's a living document, right? The idea of a business model canvas is connected back to Steve Blank's old quote that there are no facts inside the building. So what we're doing is writing down all of our thoughts from inside the building, right? From inside of our company. We're writing down all the things we think are true. And then when we say that something is, that we think it's true, what we're saying is this is an assumption. We assume it to be true, right? So we can take those assumptions, translate them into hypotheses, take those hypotheses, go out of the building and test them. And then we bring that data back right into the business model canvas, and we do a new version of it. So over time, you can literally have version 1, version 2, version 3. And if you're moving quickly through a startup, you're going to have a new canvas every freaking week. And then you just have a stack of these that you can literally flip through, like those old animated books. They have like a different drawing in each page. And it's like the story of your startup as you like flip through all of them.
Yeah.
So it's not, the business model canvas isn't a destination. It's a process. And I think once we elucidate what all of those boxes are, I think this will probably make more sense to talk about.
Okay.
But thank you for letting me rant for a moment, Dan. It's something that sits in my brain and irks me.
No, you know what? And as it should, because you're right. I like your approach, and I like how you think about it, because the canvas in and of itself is just a piece of paper. It's just a tool. It's up to us to decode it and make use of it.
Right.
And so that's awesome. Okay. So what I want to do, typically my job is to basically orient folks to the canvas and say, these are the parts, this is how they fit together, this is what they mean. Hold on a second.
I hear you got the gardener coming through right about now. That's just inconvenient timing. But so what we want to do is, like, if we can, Dan, this is my ask of you, lawnmower and all, it's not very loud on our side, is if we can take like 4 or 5 minutes per box and just go box 1, box 2, box 3, and have you do that orientation that you do. Give us the lay of the land of this beautiful visual tool. What do all the boxes mean? How do we fill them out? How do we put it to good use? And then we'll connect all the dots back together again. So can I guess that you want to start at the middle of the canvas?
You absolutely can.
All right. Take it away, Dan. Take it away.
All right, cool. So first thing that we're going to talk about is the value proposition. So we see this is the canvas, right? And so I filled this out with an example of a consultancy, right? Because, that's what I do. And oh, by the way, what's actually kind of cool is once you understand a consultancy, that is actually kind of sort of Wizard of Oz test to get to a software as a service business. So basically you're understanding process manually, and then eventually you can automate it, right? And that, I feel like that's pretty much for any business. All right, so let's look at that value proposition in the middle. That's box number 1. So what is the value proposition? Well, The value proposition is in the center of the canvas. And what that is it's the thing around which everything revolves. The value proposition is that thing for which our customers will exchange currency. And so currency doesn't necessarily have to be money. It could be time, it could be attention, it could be subscribes, likes, whatever it is, whatever the value the customer is giving us. And so as we're kind of thinking about this, the value proposition is basically the thing that you're building the whole business around. It's like, okay, I want to solve this problem. I want to do this thing. Now, it always comes down to two things. And those are basically, those two things are what it is, or the functional aspect of the value proposition, and what it means to the customer, or the emotional aspect of the value proposition, right? So in the example of a consultancy, like the functional thing would be basically like, I'm a consultant and I'm providing like advice and know-how and all that other kind of stuff to a particular client, and the client is getting something out of it. It means something to them. Well, it depends on which type of customer they are in terms of what they're actually getting out of it. So basically, I kind of want to talk about customers now, right? Because this will fold back into value prop. So just remember for right now, value proposition is basically that thing of value that we're delivering to the customer. So the next question is, okay, who are the customers and what are customers? And this thing says customer segments. And wait a minute, why are we starting in the middle and then going all the way over to the right-hand side? Shouldn't we go to the left-hand side? Okay, so an answer to all those questions is you need a customer in order to have a value proposition. You need a heads in order to have a tails, right? Yeah. So this side of the right-hand side of the canvas is all about like getting something that's desirable for other people. The value proposition starts with us, but then we need the customers to actually give it meaning and give it purpose. And that's what the customer segment block is all the way over there on the right-hand side. So customer segments are basically groups of people that have similar problems and feel similarly about those problems, right? So it's not just enough to have people that have the same problem. They have to experience the problem emotionally similarly. So it has to suck equally for all these people, right? Because really when it comes down to messaging our value proposition and we're telling people, hey, this is what the value prop is and this is what we want to do for you and how we want to solve your problem, we also have to tell them, hey, this is how it's going to feel once your problem is solved. And oh, by the way, we know what your problem is right now because this is how it makes you feel. Mm-hmm. So if we can communicate that to like groups of people, then we have a segment. So let me show you the segment block here. So in a consultancy, basically you have like, this isn't like hard set in stone, but this is generally what I've observed as a consultant, is that there's usually 3 different types of folks that I have in a consultancy with when I'm showing business stuff, right? There's people that are curious about starting a business. There are people that are actually doing it. They're starting a business. And then there's people that are already in business that need to kind of, either innovate on a product line, make improvements to a product line, find new customers, pivot, whatever it is, right? Okay, so those are groupings, right? So the curious folks, they're like, hey, should I even do this? Like, do I have an idea that doesn't suck? And how do I know it's not going to suck? And this is going to be a big risk, right? That's where they're at. The people that are starting out, they're like, hey, I already put my chips on the table and I'm waiting for those cards to fall, and I need to make sure that they fall in a controlled manner, right? And I need some guidance. And then there's people that are already in business and they say, they're basically like, okay, so if we're already in business, then what's the deal? That means that like everything's up and running. Like I'm already playing cards and I'm like a couple of bets in or whatever. Now I need to like actually play the game intelligently. Okay, so that's a different. So you can see like at each of these different parts, or at each of these different pieces, each of these segments, everybody's in a different situation. Like they get the same product over and over again, which is a consultancy, right? They get one-on-one training, or they get workshops or something like that, or they get a guide helping them through a design sprint like we do with the Right Box. And so the product actually looks the same, but it means different things for different people. Yeah. So let's fold back now to the value proposition. Let's see how this looks, right? So we talked about value prop as being a thing that means a particular thing to a particular customer. Now that we see these three different customer segments, people that are curious, people that are starting, and people that are already in business, now let's look for this linkage here. So in the value proposition, we have what it is. It's me providing knowledge to somebody who's curious. I'm like, hey, this is what the business model actually looks like in your case. This is what you have to do, et cetera, et cetera. And over on the what it means, like somebody who is curious just doesn't know. There's a lot of things there, right? They're exploring. And so the thing that they actually get, they receive certainty at the end of a session or at the end of their journey in terms of the curiosity phase, right? And so that's one segment. And then the next segment is people that are actually starting, right? They've already put their chips on the table. What is the thing that they need from me at that point? I'm still doing my same activities, right? And what they need is the actual plan, or that's what I help them, come up with, like a plan. This is a way ahead, all this other kind of stuff. And oh, by the way, while you're following it, like, let me show you my experience. Let me share with you what I know, right? So I'm providing guidance. And then the last segment right here, people that are already in business, they already know what they're doing. They don't need any like theory or concepts from me. They're doing it. They're already living it. So maybe what they need is assistance. That's the functional thing. Now, what does that actually mean to them? It means, hey, they get assured that maybe they're on the right track.
All right. Hold on. Pause.
Pause.
Okay, there was so much information. All right, so like let's break it down. Okay, so what I heard here, right? You started with value propositions. You're like, this is our raison d'etre, right? This is our reason for existing, is that we are providing this value, right?
I like to
finish. Thank you. And then the value, right, it has to be provided to someone. Right. And that's therefore the customer side of it. All right. So then, but this is where it got interesting. So you started talking about customers, and one quick aside, like I think a big mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs or innovators make when they start listing their customers is that they get generic with their customer segments, like we serve gamers, right? Or we serve retail businesses or something like that. And it's not specific enough to be helpful. So there's an old joke, right? That let's say that you say your customer is they're really wealthy men. They were born in the Greater London area in 1948 specifically, and they're avid dog enthusiasts, and they take their vacations in the Swiss Alps. Right. So you say, look at how specific I've gotten with my customer segment, right? Well, the problem is that customer segment, 1948, dog lover, wealthy, vacations in the Swiss Alps, born in 1948 in the Greater London area, describes both Prince Charles and Ozzy Osbourne.
Right.
And that's right. So it's not specific enough, right? So you have to get really specific on here because, like, to your point, like you're putting people who have pain into categories, and those categories get really specific because, as we say, the riches are in the niches, right? Or as I like to say, it's niches or stitches, right? So it's exactly. Okay. So awesome. So we have these customer segments, and then you did something interesting though, and this is I want to bring the canvas back up here for a second. So
wait, can I say a thing about that specificity?
Yeah.
Okay. So you talked about, the thing that you said, okay, both of those segments describe different people entirely. So what is the difference between those two? And I think at the end of the day, this is my takeaway from what you said. It's not about demographics. It's a little bit about demographics, but it's about affinities. It's about problems, and it's about psychographics as well. Right.
Exactly. There are things that both Ozzy Osbourne and Prince Charles both care about, but there are a lot of things that they both individually care about and things that they don't care about at all, right? And so, right, it's about those things. It's what finding affinities, even if the demographics don't necessarily line up, right? Love that.
Okay, so go back to what you were doing.
So the interesting thing that you were talking about here was that when you start looking at these customer segments, so if we go all the way to the right side of the canvas. And you have 3 customer segments you define: the curious, the starting, and then the ones that are in business, which you have blue and gray and yellow. Okay, so then you said, all right, so if we're talking about a value prop, each one gets their own value proposition.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about a value proposition, you're describing these functional needs and these emotional needs. So back in the middle of the canvas, we have functional needs and emotional needs broken down for each individual segment. So we have a value prop per segment. And then we've said they're after, each segment's after different things. So we're going to list functional and emotional needs specific to those customer segments.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So now we've got value prop, and now we've got customer segments. So that's 2 of 9 boxes. Yay! Right? All right. So I noticed, though, you still have 2 boxes that are in white here that we have yet to talk about.
Yes. Okay, so let's talk about the next one, right? So we have value prop, we have customer segments. Why do we spend so much time on these 2? Like, why have we front loaded that? It's because in Dan's opinion, maybe JDM's opinion as well, these are the 2 most important to get right. Now, and the reason is because you can't have a business without customers. Right? Like, and they have to voluntarily.
You can't even have a nonprofit without customers, right?
What's
Like,
that?
it doesn't work.
What?
I said you can't even have a nonprofit without customers, right?
Yes, you're right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I always like to spend so much time on this, is because it's an often overlooked yet critical piece of the business model canvas. Now, we're not done in creating a magic thing yet. My thought, and again, this is just Dan's opinion, is we have the value prop there, we have the customer on the right. There's 1 box left that actually links both of those things together, and it's not relationships.
But that sounds right, Dan.
Okay, so that box is channels. And so if you look at how the value prop, channels, and customer segment blocks all kind of fit together, they look like a puzzle piece. And in my opinion only, for those of anybody that actually agrees with me, cool, it could be your opinion too, or I can just align with your opinion, is that this is the magic puzzle piece that creates a working business model. And the reason is because once I have a value prop, I understand how to get it to customers, and I get feedback, and I have that communication, then the relationship kind of, I understand what the relationship is. And based on the relationship, I know how to charge folks, and I know what all those expectations are. So I can start that deductive process of figuring out how to deliver that on the left-hand side, right? So if I get value prop, channels, and customer segments dialed in, then I know I've got a thing. Okay, so let's talk about channels. What are channels? Channels are basically 2 things. The first thing that a channel is straight just logistics. How am I going to get this thing to my customers? So how am I going to get consulting to the curious, the people that are starting their business, the people that are in business? Well, I actually deliver it online, or I deliver it in an office. I mean, it's consulting, right? There's not a lot of overhead there in terms of, right? Like,
yeah, you're not selling it in Best Buy, right?
I mean, I could be, but yes, correct. I'm basically, I'm delivering to the customer, right? And so for a different, if this morphs over to SaaS, then, or software as a service, like, what does that look like? It's still online in Office, right? It's still delivered in those ways. It's probably more delivered online with some customer support later, right? But it's still the same thing. So it's just straight logistics. If you're doing brick and mortar, this is all about, like, a point of sale, or it's through the mail, or it's, wherever, right? Okay. Logistics aside, let's look at the second thing, that what channels are. Channels are also communication channels. So how am I actually communicating what that value proposition is each segment? Through a particular channel. So basically it's like what is the medium through which I'm delivering a message? Right? How am I communicating what the value is? And, oh, by the way, it's a 2-way thing. How am I receiving feedback, or how am I having a relationship with the customers, and what medium am I using to collect that? So my pushing communications outward might be via social media, but my receipt of customer communications might be through email, right? And that's okay. You can have like mixed channels like that, or you could have the same one, or you could have like, asynchronous or whatever. It doesn't matter. The basic idea is, what I need to do is dial in, figure out how I'm reaching these groups of affinities embodied in customers and communicating my value proposition to them, delivering it through the logistics, and then speaking with them as we're closing that loop, right? And so what does all that form? A relationship. Enter in the next box, customer relationships. Bam.
All right. Right turn.
Okay. So let's talk about those relationships for a second. Now, when I think about customer relationships, it's, maybe, my initial tendency when I was looking at this was to say, okay, well, this is all about like treating the customer right and how I'm like interfacing with the customer, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, but actually no. So what
break our brains, Dan. Break our brains.
Okay. So this is the format of the relationship or the type of relationship that I would like to have with a customer. So on one side of the spectrum, it's a transactional. It's a one and done. It's like, hey, I'm coming into the cupcake shop, I'm buying a cupcake, and I'm leaving. Now I'm hoping that, as the entrepreneur, I get repeat sales of cupcakes and stuff like that. But by definition, it's a transactional thing. It's just hey, here's money, here's a thing. Okay, great, thanks. Maybe see you next time, right? As opposed to a lifetime relationship. So the mortgage companies anyways, I have words for that, mostly because I have a mortgage. Not necessarily nice words, but they're doing a service, right? So that's a lifetime deal, right? Depending. Right. I mean, let's just call 30 years like a lifetime.
Certainly feels like it.
Dude. I mean, great. I have a space. I'm living in it. Awesome. I'm grateful. So those caveats aside, I'm basically in business for life with these people, right? And so what does that mean? As the entrepreneur, that means that I am basically in a relationship with these people for a long time or long term, right? That means monthly payments over a long period of time, not just for mortgage companies, but it also could be for like putting folks on retainer, or it could be like financial management companies, stuff, people that are with you through thick and thin and all that other kind of stuff, right? So we have two ends of the spectrum. One is a transactional, one's a lifetime. And usually what happens is when we're first starting out, it's usually centered around the transactional side of the relationship. And as you build trust, then you can start doing bundles, and then you can start doing like yearly retainers, and then you can do 5-year commitments, all the way up to lifetime commitments and stuff like that, right? So that's what this block is all about. Now, why? So if we have let's go back to the thing real quick. I want to. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so if we have the value prop in the middle, we have the customer segments on the right, we got these channels dialed in, we've got that magic puzzle piece put in, right? So the next thing that basically evolves from that piece is, well, this is how customers want to interact with us. And we know that because we've already dialed in the rest of the things, right? And so now we understand what the relationship is. Why is it important to understand the relationship? It's because that actually informs how we're actually going to charge people. How people are comfortable in paying us. So they want to pay us on a monthly basis. They want to pay us transactionally. They want to pay us over a course of 5 years, whatever, right? So that relationship actually elucidates what that potential revenue stream can be. All right. So that basically makes up the desirability portion of the value of the business model canvas. Now let's talk about revenues real quick.
Well, hold on. But before we go into revenues, I want to put a button on this whole thing, because we just went through a ton of stuff.
Do it now.
All right, so you have a customer, they have some type of problem, you are claiming a solution to all their ills in the form of a value proposition, and it's
going to make it feel good.
And it's going to make them feel good. It's going to serve their needs. It's going to make them feel good, right? Functional, emotional. We got all that. That's the beginning of desirability, but it doesn't really mean anything if you don't have a relationship with them at all. And you have to have some way of communicating with them that we call channels. And so couple of things on that I just want to, like, seeds I want to drop to get juices flowing for channels and for relationships. Channels, when I think about channels, I think about basically 3 things. So I think about 2 questions that can kind of form a grid. right? So it's, are your channels direct or indirect, right? So are you directly talking to your customers, or is there somebody sitting in the middle? So you're talking to them and they're talking to your customer, right? That could be if you're selling retail, for example.
Yeah.
But there are lots of examples of that, right? So, and then there are channels that you own versus channels that are partner channels, right? And so those are kind of similar, right? But that's like the idea of selling on Amazon versus selling on your website, right?
Yep.
Both of them, you have a man in the middle. You're not directly necessarily talking to them, but you own one of them and you don't own the other. So when you think about channels, think about direct versus indirect, and think about channel versus own. It's kind of one way to get your juices flowing, because too often people put like one little note inside channels and then like call it done, and that's pretty freaking lame, right? Okay, another thing to really get the juices flowing is like, and Dan, you mentioned this a lot throughout what you were talking, but I really just want to like put a button on it, is this idea that channels are not just about sales, right? Like that's where you're talking about this whole lifetime of the relationship. And so we often break that down into like a 5-step thing. So you have channels that are in the awareness stage, right? How do they find out that you're even a thing in the first place? So social media maybe is a really powerful awareness channel. Then there's evaluation channels. Those are where your customers are doing research. How are they finding out about you? That's where, are they finding reviews about you? Where are they finding information about you? Where are they finding your posts? And like, do you have a YouTube channel where you're adding value? Like those kinds of things. So you have awareness and evaluation. Then you get into sales channels, like how are they actually making the purchase? Then you have delivery channels. So like you're talking about a consultancy. So that's in the room, right? That's where that, in the digital room or virtual room, like that's where that's happening. If you're selling a good in Best Buy, right, then you have a delivery channel that goes through that way. And then after the sale, they have this lifetime of like support channels after they sell. Like how are you engaging with them in that process, right? So those are some ways you can juice out relationships, but don't skimp here. People skimp here.
I totally agree. It's because that box is little.
It's because the box is little and it feels like, oh, well, I mean, I'm just selling it here, so done, right? And it's just like, but no, there's so many hypotheses that are just buried in there that we just never surface and therefore never challenge. And relationships are kind of a similar thing. And I won't go into as much detail because I know we're kind of short on time for them. But like when it comes to relationships, these are like, think about the experience that you want. That's how I think about relationships, is what is the experience that you're delivering? Like there's a really big difference between self-service SaaS and like a white glove service. Those are very different experiences. And so like when you start thinking about how you establish those relationships, that's kind of how you want to do it. And it's spectra, right? They're not discrete choices. There's a whole spectrum here. Like where do you fit on there? And then I do want to drop one thing in here, and that is co-creation, because it's very often left off the conversation of relationships. Okay, so I'm going to actually do this by way of example. So because co-creation is the idea that you are creating value with your customer. And I'm not referring to the design thinking aspect of it. I'm referring to the actual value that you're delivering to your customers, co-created with them. 2 examples. Okay, so one is YouTube. YouTube's value prop is that they have tons of content. So they have a platform that allows content creators to contribute content. So YouTube is co-creating the very value of its platform with its users. And that's part of the relationship.
Okay.
Right? So that's a really important part of the relationship to surface there. Here's a different one. And this one's a little bit more subtle, and this one's a lot more fun. And that would be Amazon. Amazon, one of the biggest values is not the ability to purchase a product, but the ability to read customer reviews before the products are purchased.
Okay.
People will go into Best Buy and they'll look up a product on Amazon to see the reviews, right? Which actually caused a lot of problems for Best Buy and back in the day. But that's a story for another time. But what they're doing here is they are co-creating that value with their customers by creating a mechanism by which customers can contribute those very same reviews, which are a core part of Amazon's value proposition. That's relationship as well.
Fire.
So anyway, like just wanted to like put a button on some of those things that you were talking about there.
Yeah, I love that. In fact, I really like that difference that you made between, okay, there's co-creating a value proposition with your customers, like in the design process, co-designing through collaboration, right? But then there's also co-creating of actual value, like of functional value. And that was there's a new wrinkle in my brain now. Thank you.
My mission accomplished.
Awesome.
All right. So I stopped you. You were moving on to our revenue box. So I turn the conversation back over to you.
All right. So, okay. So revenues. So revenues are basically reflective of that relationship that we're going to have with the customer. Like the customer is telling us, okay, this is how I would like to pay. This is how frequently I would like to pay. This is what I would like to pay. Right. So there's a couple of those things in there. And there are 6 building blocks, which means 6 typical patterns, 6 typical ways that people will remit payment to a business in exchange for the value proposition. And I'm going to go through those 6. These aren't necessarily all there are, but they're basic, which means that you can mix and match. You have like components of these are actually in all the other kinds of ways that you can actually charge people, right? So these are basically just at an atomical level. These are the revenue streams, right? The ways you can charge folks. So number 1 is an asset sale, which means I have a thing, I'm giving you a thing, and you're buying the thing. I want to go to okay, right here. So we have we could see that not grayed out. Asset sale is the thing, right? So I have a thing, you're buying it, you're getting it, we're happy. The next one is usage fee. So usage fee is actually, hey, I'm going to allow you to use my thing and you're going to pay to use the thing. Like a good example of that would be like bridge toll, right? Now, the third one is lending, renting, or leasing. And what this is basically granting exclusive access to a particular asset to the customer for a specific amount of time. Right. So it's basically, here's the thing, it's yours until tomorrow. Don't break it. Right. Okay. So that's number 3. Now, the fourth one is subscription. And I know we're all familiar with this one. Subscriptions are ubiquitous.
We've all got lots of them.
Tiresomely so. It started back in the day with, newspapers, magazines, all that kind of stuff. And now it's like whatever. So like SaaS, right? So software as a service, that's all subscription laden. Okay. So it's basically, hey, I'm going to provide you a service and you're going to pay on like regular intervals for that service. The next one is licensing, which basically means I made a thing and I can copy it as many times as I want. I'm going to give you a copy and you can use it for a specified amount of time. And that's called a license. So it basically grants the person, ability to use that exclusively for them, but not non-exclusively for them. Right. Okay. So, and then the sixth revenue stream that we can use is something called advertising. And I know we're all familiar with this. If you use social media, you're a part of the advertising revenue model. Basically, your attention is being exchanged for ad dollars. Right. And it's not unique to social media. I mean, this was in place long before that happened. Like you go into a restaurant, you see a placemat, and then on the placemat, there was like little squares of like different businesses in the area. That's advertising model, right? Or it used to be the phone book, or it was ads in magazines, that other kind of stuff. That's all that model. So here's what that says. Basically, I have an audience and a vendor wants to access my audience and I will do so for a fee. Does that sound like sponsorship? Yeah, kind of, because it is, right? That's the advertising model. Okay, so that will wrap up the revenue side of, or the revenues block of the canvas. Okay, so any comments about that, Josh, before we go on to the Sherlock Holmes piece?
So I am very curious about this Sherlock Holmes piece you got going on. Very curious where you're going with that. Yeah. So I'd say a couple things on revenue, because this is something that's obviously really important to business, and it's one of the areas where I think a lot of startup founders don't place a lot of thought into. Really, like I think a lot of the time it's just like it's on SaaS, so it's a subscription, done, check, right? And then
you talked about this in like a previous episode.
I did. Yeah. And so like, here's continuing my theme. I'm going to give some practical advice, right? So I think of pricing as in 2 categories, regardless of the mechanism. Like you just went through 6 mechanisms, but regardless of the mechanism, I think of fixed pricing versus dynamic pricing. So fixed pricing is like when you're charging the same amount and it doesn't change, right? It's not dependent on anything that actually changes. So that doesn't mean that there's one price, because you could set the price by the quantity that you've purchased, right? If you buy 10 of them, you get this rate. If you buy 30 of them, you get this rate, whatever. You can also set the price by the quality of the value itself. So that would be like a SaaS where you have like a package 1, package 2, package 3, right? It's still fixed pricing. You just have different
beginner
different
and pro. Basically.
Right, exactly. And then the premium, right, or whatever. And
so the free version that looks cool, that doesn't do shit. The pro version that like looks cool, acts cool, does some cool stuff, but doesn't give you everything that you need. And then the final version, which basically enables you to do what it promises you to do.
Exactly.
Not that I'm bitter.
Right. And well, you're going to really get bitter with the last fixed pricing, which is like you can charge different prices to different kinds of customers just based on who they are. Right. And so this is actually
that, dude, you know what? That kind of reminds me of every time I show up in Turkey and Istanbul, I always pay double because there is no way I look Turkish.
Right. No right. I mean, you could have fooled me, but
I hate that shit.
Right. So, but it's a thing, and it's still fixed pricing. So dynamic pricing, on the other hand, is when the price actually does vary based on factors that you don't necessarily set yourself. So that's negotiation. So if you had a consultancy and you always negotiate the cost of a deal, right? That's dynamic pricing. It can vary on market conditions. Like think about Uber, right? It's more expensive when there are fewer drivers than there are rides. So like rush hour, and they do pricing for that. So there's that. You can auction. That's how ads work. Ads actually work based on auction. You can vary based on the amount of inventory, particularly if it's perishable. So when we think about perishable things, we often think about like food. And it's true that like the cost of produce goes down, right? If it's further off the farm and therefore moving around. So if it goes into Safeway straight off the farm, right, you pay top dollar. But if it gets off the farm a little late and it goes to one of the discount supermarkets, right, it's lower because it's perishable. If they don't sell it, it's garbage, right? So they have to sell it for less. But think about a different one. Hotel rooms are perishable, because it's a per room per night. And if you don't sell that night, it's worth nothing. So as you get closer to the date, those prices go down. And that's where you get these like secondary markets of hotel rooms, because they need to sell them because it's use it or lose it. So that's, again, dynamic pricing for that kind of thing.
Debt sounds like one of those too. Like when you buy a debt.
It can be, right?
It can be. Airplane seats.
Airplane seats
in Europe, where they're honest about it.
Yeah, wow, yeah, that's true. But anyway, so there's lots of different ways to think about pricing, and so I wanted to say to say that. So,
you know what, I love what you're bringing to this canvas, because like I always talk about this in my job. Like I said, I mean, I consider my job just to be an orientation guide, right? But what you're doing is you're talking about some nuanced aspects that I really like, because there's so much more. Right. And that kind of underlines like the whole thing that we started off the stream with, was that, okay, so here's the canvas, here's the orientation, but there's always a level deeper that you can get. And it's not a thought exercise so much as it is a practice. Like the initial take that we have on the canvas is basically like, okay, this is our snapshot right now. This is our guidance. This shows us where our assumptions are, so that we know what to focus on mentally as we're going through all these different processes. And what you're talking about are, hey, as you get further down into the model, like, and you're practicing, then the model actually changes its meaning as we start to use it for what it is, which is, a business tool, not a checkbox.
Right. Okay, cool.
Love it.
So we got about 15 minutes left here, and we got a lot more to get through. So because we're only halfway through the canvas.
Well, true. True, but let me challenge you on your time hack thing. We spent most of the time on the right-hand side, right?
Right.
And so we did that on purpose. And the reason is because by virtue of what you and I do, and by virtue of what this live stream is all about, we should spend more time on the right-hand side of the canvas, because it's all about making assumptions, creating hypotheses, testing those hypotheses, all that kind of stuff. Right?
Preach, Dan, preach.
Right. So I'm comfortable with quote shortchanging the left-hand side of the canvas, mostly because everybody does this left side of the canvas. The right-hand side, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm just going to go ahead and opine here for a moment. The right-hand side of the canvas is the art of startup. This is the art of getting customers. If you know the right-hand side and you're like good with the right-hand side and you're not treating it as a checklist, you're treating it as a practice, you pretty much cannot go wrong. Am I right?
You are totally right. We were talking about this on, I think it was last week's show or the week before, where like sorry, I'm just going to say it, but the left-hand side is boring. And it's not boring because it's unimportant. It is very important, but it's also the easiest thing in the world to figure out. There are entire industries built around getting efficient and getting good at that kind of thing and finding partnerships and building those kinds of things and really leveling up inside your company. It's boring. That's how boring it is. With the whole point of this, the right side of the canvas is that we're doing something novel. It's something new. It's something unknown. And that's why it's not just science. That's why there is that art involved. It's so much more interesting. This is where the A team plays. The A team plays on the left side of the canvas. The B team plays on the I got that backward. I botched the whole thing. I'm gonna say that again. The A team plays on the right-hand side of the canvas, and the B team plays on the left side of the canvas.
Right, because you were talking about like what's our job is to actually figure out the problem, and then once we have all that dialed in, then optimization happens. And there are people that devote their entire careers and their lives to optimization. Great, that's why we have MBAs. That's why we have people that are in the business to like optimize and streamline and all that kind of stuff, right? But our fundamental job as founders, as entrepreneurs, is to tease out the truth that is hidden in all the details as revealed by validated right-hand side of the canvas boxes.
Okay, so preach.
Not that I'm passionate or anything like that.
I am so with you here. All right. So, but we don't want to neglect it. We did say this is the complete guide of the business model canvas. So let's take maybe 2 minutes per box and let's do what goes in, like key activities, key resources, key partnerships, cost structure. Dan, take it away.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so let's look at right here. Okay, so this is the slide that will elucidate the left-hand side of the canvas. Now, there's 3 boxes there. To the left of the value proposition box, on top we have key activities. Then below that we have key resources, and then we have key partners, right? And so rather than taking each individual box, I'll just kind of like talk about in general what these do. These are all different aspects of how we actually create that value proposition, right? So when I say this like is Holmesian, I basically means that we're using like, we have a problem, it's already defined, it's already there, and we're using this deductive process to actually solve for X. Little side note, that sounds a little bit like algebra, right? And algebra is actually a romanticization of the Arabic word al-jabr, which means to boil down, basically to distill, right? So that's why it's a deductive process, right? We already know what the problem is in the value prop, right? We want to boil it down to solve for X. And that's what activities, resources, and partners are. Let me show you how. So the resources are basically the minimum set of things that we need to actually make it happen. So these are the tools, these are the supplies, these are the people, these are the things that we need to actually create the value proposition. Now, the activities are basically what we actually do with those resources. So in the example of a consultancy, like a resource would be, hey, I need a laptop. I need some software to help me manage stuff like fulfillment and CRM, like John said earlier. And I actually need information. I need to provide content and stuff like that, right? Or I need a source of information. That's just with a consultancy. But for any other business, like let's say that we have like a cupcake shop, for example, the resources would be like, what's the equipment that I need? Who are the people that are actually helping me do this, like employees and stuff like that? And then what are the what are the ingredients that I need to actually create this thing, right? So it's all like those things that actually make it happen. Now, if the resources are the things that make it happen, the activities are what I'm doing with the things to actually make it happen. And so when I look at the activities box, it's basically like any word that ends in ing kind of goes in the activities box, right? And this is the key activities box, which means, I'm just picking like the highlights. But is more or less like my core competencies. That's usually what it comes out to. So as a consultant, what I find myself doing over and over and over again are 3 things. And I have to make sure that I'm pretty good at them, at least for me. I got to make sure I'm good at teaching. I got to make sure I'm good at content creation. And I got to make sure I'm good at advising. So the difference between like the teaching and the advising is teaching is basically for a group of folks, and then advising is for one-on-one people. And so that looks different, right? The way you talk with a group is different than, you know, how you talk with a person individually. But anyways, that's the idea. So the resources are what I need to actually make it happen, and the activities are what I need to do with those things. Now, the way I like to say the key part, or, you know, talk about the key partners after this is basically like, okay, well, once I know what I need to do and how I need to do it, like I can't do it all myself because I got basically 2 of these, right? I just got 2 hands. So I need help. And so the key partners are basically the people that help me make it, supply it, equip it, sell it, all those kinds of things, right? So the key partners are my helpers. All right. So that's the left-hand side. I want to just close this out and talk about costs real quick. And then I want to get your take on all this. Is that okay?
Let's do it.
All right. So let's look at costs, right? So there's no such thing as a free lunch, which basically means I have to pay for my resources, I got to pay for my activities, and I got to pay for my partners, right? And so how do I do that? Well, I do that by thinking about my costs, right? And so basically, once I understand my costs, then I can circle that back to revenue. And now I can compare apples and oranges. And then I can have this whole financial thing that's actually kind of built, right? And so now that closes the loop of the model very nicely. So what kind of costs are we talking about? Let's look at that real quick. I only like to break this down, at least when I'm orienting folks to the canvas, into a couple main pieces. One is startup costs, and the other one are recurring costs, right? So as I'm starting things up, I mean, I'm always going to have to, like, you know, you gotta spend money to make money, that kind of thing, right? So I've always got to buy like my initial supplies, my initial inventory, baseline, all that kind of stuff, right? But once I'm actually in business, then I have things that are going to cost me on an ongoing basis. Okay. That's basically what it costs me to run the business on a periodic basis. So monthly, weekly, yearly, whatever. And I like to break the recurring costs down into 2 boxes. One are fixed costs and one are variable costs. So the fixed costs are costs that generally stay the same. So fixed costs would be like rent, utilities, internet, that kind of stuff. Variable costs are costs that are directly associated with the volume of sales. In other words, things that depend on how much I sell. So cost of materials, cost of supplies, the cost of payroll if people are on salaries and stuff like that, right? Those are variable costs. Now, there's a way to figure out what break even looks like in each of these scenarios that goes beyond the scope of this orientation. But usually when you start getting into like the balance sheet, you're looking at profits and losses, and you're looking at financial projections and stuff. What they do is they take into consideration all these things plus what we think the revenues are going to be. And so based on all that, then you can start putting together those proverbial financials that lenders or investors like to see, and actually have some, like, you know, thought behind all of that. So that will wrap up my orientation of Canvas. Curious to hear what you think, Josh.
Yeah. Whew. Okay. I mean, like, let's just take a second and be like, all right, fire hose is off. We got all the information in. So let me just do a quick tour of the entire canvas here, right? Okay. So we have 9 boxes. And you kind of split them up into usual design thinking parlance, right? Which we didn't make clear, so I want to make that explicit now. So we have, when we talk about this, and we'll put a link in the show notes to a past show where we talk more about this. But we break down design thinking, particularly for startups, into 3 basic like steps. You know, we talk about desirability, and then viability, and then feasibility, right? And the canvas largely looks like that. And that viability is the first thing. It's the important thing. Are we doing something that's worth doing in the first place because it's something people want? Don't waste your life building something people don't want. And so that's where we look at this first part about who are the customers and what's the value proposition. And we look at what relationship we're trying to establish with them, and where are we going to find them? That's just like, is there something out there that people even want, right? And then we move on from there and we talk about, all right, is this worth our time, you know, to do, because we were going to make amazing money at it? And so that's when we look about our revenue and we look at our costs and like, can we get those into a way that makes sense? And then we have feasibility, which is like, can we actually pull this off, right? Can we literally pull this off, and should we pull this off? And that's where we get like key partners, key activities, and key resources. So like, that's the full picture of a business. And we're always talking about, again, like those 4 things of creating value for a customer, capturing value from those exchanges, right? And then and delivering that value to them somewhere, right? So it's always a customer value creation, value capture, and value delivery. It's always those things. And this canvas is like a breakdown of those. But so that's a big tour de force of the tool itself. But this is where people make mistakes. And this is where we started off when Dan teed me up for my rant early on in the show, was that one of my pet peeves is that people use this as like I'm creating a business plan. And so I'm going to fill out this canvas and then I know more about my business. And while that's true, you have filled out the canvas and you do know more about your business. Most people will go, okay, I've got it. I've got a business model canvas, done, check.
But no, that's wrong,
man.
That's wrong.
Big no. I agree. So no, that's not right, because all we've put down are assumptions. The nature of doing something innovative is that it hasn't been done before. That's why it's innovative. Even if somebody else has done it somewhere else in a clone market someplace, right? You have not done it. Your organization has not done it. There are new capacities, new capabilities, and because we're talking about startups, this is from scratch, right?
And
you're building
new
up
customers, I would say, as well, right?
And new customers. So there's an assumption that's even there, right? So it's all we've got are assumptions. The nature of doing something innovative, that's why it's interesting. That's why we use design thinking to get at it in the first place. We need a different set of tools. But because we have so many assumptions, what we have to do next is find our riskiest assumption and then find a way to test that. And so what does that mean? So our riskiest assumption is the one for which we have the least amount of data, right? So least amount of data makes it the most uncertain. Mm-hmm. So we're finding something that's really uncertain. What about all of this is the most uncertain thing in there? And of those things that are really uncertain, which one of those, if we're wrong, will sink our business, right? That's oftentimes in an early stage startup. Are there customers out there? Do they have this problem? Is the solution right? Those are all things where if we're wrong, we're done. We're just done. So we want to.
So what would you say? What would you say to the folks that are saying, okay, well, I have this unknown about like the supply chain and how this is actually going to work. Can I actually like pull this off? Like, how do I balance that with? And which one is more important, do you think?
Right. So it's so common. Thank you for bringing that into specific relief, because there's 2 ways I'd answer it. So one is think about design thinking, right? It's desirability, viability, feasibility. You're asking a feasibility question. And while there are exceptions to this, particularly when it involves a brand new invention of some kind, almost always, 99 times out of 100, your riskiest assumption just isn't found that far down the chain. Your riskiest assumption is like, even if you were to build it, will someone buy it in the first place? So that's where you start.
I mean, I totally agree with you, right? Because you know what I like to think about is we have the technology. And yes, it's difficult to come up with new technologies and new stuff that hasn't been done before. But, you know, we talked about in a previous episode how we can always cut that BHAG in half.
Right.
And I can actually build up to that revolutionary tech that's coming.
Right. But you don't have to jump straight there.
Yeah, I gotta have the customers. I have to have that initial reaction, you know, that initial traction for however it actually looks, so that I can actually, you know, have that relationship and I can co-create not only just a value proposition, but also, if it's called for, co-create the actual value that the startup delivers, right?
And then, so we're like, okay, the riskiest thing is always on the customer side because we're doing something new. So that's where you got to start. And once you have your risky assumption, then you have to test it. This is where, and we'll put a link in the show notes to our episode all about testing. We did the top 10 ways to test a business idea. So check that out for sure. I'll throw a card up in the corner as well. But that's where you have to actually do an experiment. You have to take that assumption, turn it into a hypothesis that makes sense, get out of the building and see if there's data. And here's where this ties back to the business model canvas, because now you've got data. Now you come back to the business model canvas and say, what has to change something on the canvas is now changing. And because that thing's changed, the whole calculus changed. All these boxes are touching each other for a reason. If your customer changes, the relationships and the channels might change too.
Yep.
And then your pricing might change. So you're always iterating on this model, going back through a loop until there's no uncertainty left. And then you scale. And then honestly, then you start over. And
because you're changing a thing. And every time you change a thing, like everything else changes.
That's right.
Because it's all linked together.
So that is where, like, I cannot emphasize enough the need to iterate. Get in a habit, a mindset of this process of iteration, of finding out new things, of learning, of validated learning is what we call it in the lean startup model. Get validated learning and iterate and go forward. But speaking of going forward, that's all the time we've got for today. So thank you everybody so much for joining us. We're here live on YouTube every single Friday at 11 a.m. So we will be back 1 week from today on the 11th at 11 a.m. The 11th at 11 a.m. is weird to say, but that's when we'll be back. There's a playlist here that you'll also just appear as a card here right in just a second for the playlist in case you want to go back and watch past shows. But to wrap things up, Dan, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, they can Google Dan Casas-Murray because it's a pretty unique name. Or if you don't want to do all that mess, you can just go on LinkedIn and look me up under @Dan Casas-Murray because I'm there. What about you, Josh?
So you can find me at jdm.bio. And if you do, all my social stuff is there as well. You can go for this YouTube channel, Twitter, TikTok, all that stuff. But also I have my weekly newsletter. It's one tip, trick, tool, or technique or mindset shift that you can use to improve your innovative efforts. If you want to sign up for that, get that in your inbox, you can do that there at jdm.bio. So that's it. That was our complete guide to the business model canvas. Got some fun people in the audience today.
Thanks,
so
John.
Thank you, John. All right, and with that, we will end the show. See you guys next week. See you, Dan.
See you later.